Ms. Johnson, I'd like to start with you if possible. I've long been concerned about how various companies operating online are targeting adult-themed ads to children, sometimes to young children, but in many, many instances to minors in one way or another. In your research, what can you tell me about the sexually explicit or adult-themed advertisements that are targeted to children, and about what harms children experience as a result of those?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. So as you mentioned, children, teens, older children, tweens, everyone is seeing content and ads that are age inappropriate. And in a common sense study looking at YouTube, for example, they saw that for videos viewed by children under 8, 1 in 5 contained ads that were not age appropriate, including sexual content, benign things like ads for lingerie, or something less benign, if you think that's benign for a 5-year-old. It's pretty common for older tweens and teens to also come across sexual content. A recent study came out where users identified as around 13 years old and were almost immediately, especially if they were boys, targeted with what appeared to be sort of escort services and ads. This is a real problem, however, it's happening. Parents often don't know that these things are happening. Kids are watching on small screens, they're watching in their bedrooms. It's not, everyone watching together in the family television. So parents aren't there to know what's going on and to help stop it. As discussed with Senator Blackburn, there are often not ways to filter for these things or to turn them off. And kids and teens are getting exposed to more content than many of us would like them to at a very young age.
Aside from, outside the context of COPPA, is there anything you think we ought to focus on that we could do about it?
Sure. I think that we should also pass sort of a Children's Television Act for the digital age, like the KIDS Act, which Senator Markey and Blumenthal introduced last year. And that would create some advertising and some content rules around content. And address sort of compulsive aspects and manipulative design in games. I also think we need more research into how media and tech are affecting kids, all kinds of things. And for that, we'd love to point to the Bipartisan Camera Act, which would support NIH-funded research.
Well, thank you. That's helpful. There have been countless stories about how the various platforms, including YouTube, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, and so forth, can end up facilitating child exploitation and also provide easy access to child pornography. Each of these platforms have an app available through the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, and those stores in turn have age ratings to help guide consumers to age-appropriate content. But why is it that there is sometimes such a disparity between the app's rating and the content that may be available on that platform?
That's an excellent question, Senator, and one that is probably best directed to the platforms or the content creators themselves. It is something that we have struggled with for video games also, and with apps, that they'll have one age rating and they'll have a different privacy age rating, and then they'll have a different content rating. And it's pretty opaque, like a lot of the tech practices, and it is certainly something that for parents who are trying to pick something for their kids, they would be much helped by having at least one single reliable rating.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting when I've had this conversation with many of the people running some of these businesses. Very often their answer is similar to yours. Now, in your case, you don't run them. You're on the outside trying to make a difference. For those companies that are actually running them, I find the answer less than satisfying. What do you think we ought to consider? Is that something we ought to look at as a Congress in figuring out whether there are ways to ensure the transparency of the app rating system and provide some clarity on the content that may be available for those platforms and whether it's consistent with the age appropriateness rating?
I think that's definitely something to look at. I think the platforms and app stores play a huge gatekeeper role in determining what can be shown and how it's going to be pushed on families and sold to different audiences. And so if there was a it's not fair to put something in the Design for Families section of the Google Play Store if it's not actually designed for families, for example, in Common Sense's opinion, or not a similar store on Apple. So if we could get gatekeepers to come together and agree on some basic standards and communicate those transparently, that would be very helpful. They also need to clean up the underlying practices, but transparency is great too.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I see my time's expired. I did have some additional questions I wanted to ask to Commissioner Olhausen, but given the time and the communications hiccups that we've got, I'll submit those for the record. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Senator Lee. We're still hoping that maybe we'll correct the